Hey everyone, and welcome to today's open house. My name is Rob Fusco. I am a customer service rep over here at Berkleemusic. I'm a Berklee alum and fellow drummer, and I am a former student of our guest today, Rod Morgenstein. Rod has been a professor at Berklee for 14 years now? Yeah. He's a founding member of the rock fusion group Dixie Dregs, drummer of Winger. He's a 5-time winner of the Modern Drummers Readers Poll for Best Progressive Rock Drummer. He's been on the cover of international drum magazines a total of 13 times now. He's an international drum instructor, has been to hundreds of clinics in over 20 countries, and an all-around amazing guy. Welcome, Rod.
Great to be here.
Yeah. So let's start from the beginning. How did you get your start with drumming?
Okay, there was a defining moment in my life when I think I was about 10 years old. My family was gathered around the TV set to watch the Beatles perform for the first time in America on the Ed Sullivan Show. And it was a defining moment for me, and I never looked back. I knew in that moment I wanted to be a drummer. I identified with Ringo Starr, and you know, here we are however many years later, some 40+ odd years, and still doing what really impacted me that evening. Now, it's kind of interesting that, you know, if you fast forward from that day, watching the band on television, found myself with the Dixie Dregs in Hollywood, California, recording our very first record. So we were in our early 20s, and I remember cutting drum tracks and looking through the control room panels, glass panels, and Ringo walked into the room. Apparently he was a friend of our producers, and when we finished recording the song, he said, "Hey boys, come on in here, I want to introduce you to somebody." And you know, it was an extraordinary moment for me, getting to meet the man who was responsible for me being there, you know, and being a drummer for all those years. And you know, he's such an important influence in my life and millions of other human beings and musicians and drummers that there's a lesson in the rock drumming course that I call the guys who started it all, and it's 6 iconic drummers from the 60s, Ringo being one of them. Then you have Charlie Watts from the Rolling Stones, John Bonham from Led Zeppelin, Ginger Baker from Cream, Mitch Mitchell, Jimi Hendrix Experience, and Keith Moon from The Who. And you know, I think those 6 drummers have had such an influence on, you know, virtually everybody who plays drums, whether they know it or not, because in the 60s, rock music was really in its infancy. Everybody was sort of finding their way. Nobody knew really what was going on. There was no corporate music scene. It was just, hey, let's make music. What are we feeling? And each one of these guys was so different. And what they brought to the table are lots of interesting signature grooves and classic drum fills. And so it was one of my favorite parts putting together for the course.
That's awesome. So we were talking about versatility earlier, and you got your start with Ringo in rock drums and eventually made your way over to fusion. How did that come about?
It started when I was a typical kid growing up in America where everything was rock, you know, and somebody turned me on to Miles Davis when he was going through his interesting transition from jazz to jazz rock. I think it might have been the choir teacher in my high school. Oh, nice. And I really liked what I heard, and then it wasn't that long after, maybe in the next year, that a band called the Mahavishnu Orchestra hit the scene, and Billy Cobham was the drummer in that band. And it was truly this indescribable fusion of, you know, the intricacies of jazz harmony and melody just melded with the raw power of rock. It was the first of its kind, and it just pulled me away from the more mainstream and progressive rock that I was into this whole other world. And then around that same time, I went to college at the University of Miami in Florida, and it was there that through some very interesting circumstances, I met the other members of the Dixie Dregs. We were all students there, and ultimately, you know, when we finished our 4-year degrees, we all looked at each other and said, "Hey, what are you going to do for the rest of your life?" "I don't know. I guess go to LA, go to New York, go to Nashville." We decided to go for it with our instrumental, no singing, you know, crazy music that didn't fit any one particular category. And you know, when you're young, you don't take no for an answer. It's like you have all these dreams that you set out to kind of conquer and fulfill. And even though all along the way, you know, people on the left and right were saying, "Guys, you don't have a chance." I mean, disco was huge at that time. It was the mid and late 70s. You know, nothing that we did was in the format of what radio was playing or what was deemed commercial. But, you know, we just kind of forged ahead, and with a couple of lucky breaks, which we could talk about that whole thing, you know, we ended up having a really nice career. And it continues to this day, where every 2 or 3 years we come together and we either do a recording and a tour, or we just get together and do a bunch of dates.
That's great. Yeah, so do you feel that being comfortable in those different styles has really helped your career overall?
Absolutely. You know, one of the words that comes to mind when I think in terms of, you know, having a career as a musician in this day and age is versatility. And what I mean by that is we all have that one area that inspires us, you know, that we're passionate about. But I think to be really smart about covering all your bases, it's a really good idea to try to be a little bit informed on a lot of different styles of music and drumming, just so that you never really have to pass on a gig that comes your way because you go, "Oh, I don't really know anything about it." And then the other thing is, I truly believe that when you have a working knowledge of, say, different styles of genres within the rock realm, and then a little bit of jazz or a little bit of fusion and country and Afro-Cuban, we can get into that whole Latin world also. If you understand like the key rhythms from a lot of those different styles, they will all sort of meld into your being and
Right.
and kind of help create like you as a unique individual where you don't necessarily sound like anybody else.
Yeah.
And if you use the knowledge you have wisely, I think it can be to great advantage.
Yeah, that's awesome. For studio playing and live performance, do you have different approaches to that?
For the most part, yeah. In the studio, you have to realize that when the recording is done, it is there for posterity forever. So even long after you're gone, you know, there will be people hopefully discovering you 100 years from now. And so, you know, I take great care in wanting, you know, everything that I play to be where it's supposed to be. So I give a lot of thought to the drum parts that I create for live recordings. Now, for studio recordings, excuse me. When you play live, you're kind of in the moment, and I think there's more of a spirit of taking chances, going out on a limb, and if you fall on your face, it's okay because, you know, it's not being recorded for the long term. Of course, there are people always sneaking in there, you know, little tape machines to kind of get recorded, and they trade them online. But I'm saying, you know, in terms of, you know, the recordings where you take weeks, months, years to get exactly what you want, you kind of like just work out your parts. But the live playing, you can take chances. The only style of music where I don't think in those terms is when I've done recordings with this band called Jazz is Dead, which takes more of the jam band approach. And so actually we never even did a studio recording. We have one in the can right now that we're in the midst of mixing, and hopefully we'll get it out soon. But with that one, you know, songs are typically 10 minutes long, and you don't play them the same twice. And so even though we're in the studio, you know, we kind of know what the head is, what the, you know, the verses and chorus and whatever else is in the form. But then when the jam opens up, it's like, hey, what direction do I feel like going in today? And, you know, the hope is if you feel good enough about your musicianship and your playing, you just take some chances, you know, and see how it all works out. And so I'm very excited to have that recording coming out, hopefully in the next year.
Nice. So any takes where the whole band just took it to a whole other level that you were not expecting?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now there's some dogs in there too, but fortunately, you know, we were holed up in this studio for a few days, and you know, some of the songs might have had 10 different takes or more. There was one in particular that I'm thinking of that I think we probably did maybe 20 takes of it. It's a long song too. It could be upwards of 10 minutes. So think about playing one song that's that long 20 times. It took the whole day to where I was really happy with my performance.
Awesome. So do you have any advice for up-and-coming drummers? Any particular areas that they should be focusing on?
Yeah. You know, this is not just young drummers. It's also drummers who've been playing a while. We have to get to a point where we appreciate the basics, okay? And the basics, when I was a fusion drummer and I was transitioning back into the rock world, where I then ultimately met Winger, I looked down at my nose at anything that was less than a really busy groove with a lot of ghost strokes in it. I thought that simple was stupid. It was the same word, you know, simple equals stupid, because in my mind, anybody can play pa, pa. But when you think about it, why is it that there are a handful of drummers who play in that style, that real hard-hitting, basic, simple style, that keep getting the calls for all the important recordings and the bands, the big bands that play that more roots rock? There's a reason, and that's because we could have a room filled with 100 drummers, and the instructions are to play that beat, pa, with an eighth note ride pattern on a closed hi-hat. And odds are that after the 100 drummers have played, we'd go around the room and go, that was really good. That was excellent. But everybody's playing the same thing, so what's the deal, you know? So I think it comes down to having respect for the basics, you know, and then everything else flows from that. It's like learning to ride a bicycle. Like, you can't ride with no hands and do all the tricks until you can just keep your bicycle going straight, you know,
yeah,
without any bells and whistles. So respect. And that's kind of how, like, the rock drums course starts out. It goes right back to the basics, and with what I call, you know, 7 tried and true kick snare patterns, where the first one is just da, and there are 7 of them, pa, or, you know, do ba, do ba, and to kind of tie it all together and drive home the fact that for the 50, 60 years of rock and roll, these same beats keep recycling. I have musical examples way back of, say, you know, something all the way from the 50s even, that will use that kick and snare pattern all the way up to some of the newer bands, you know, whether it's Death Cab for Cutie or, you know, Art of Dying. You know, those are some of the newer bands, but then the bands in between, like, you know, Van Halen, you know, 70s bands, or AC/DC, yeah, and everything before and after, because these same patterns, they're there. I don't think anyone could choose an album that has 10 or 12 tunes on it, where we wouldn't find one of those 7 kick snare patterns on it.
Yeah, you know, it's the essence of rock.
It's the essence. So everything starts from that, and then even, you know, if your passion is progressive rock or, you know, prog metal, it all starts from there. And that's sort of how the 12 weeks weave their way. You start all the way getting back to the essence, and then by the time we get through it, you know, we've been pounding double bass for those who are into double bass. It's not a requirement. Odd time, ghost stroke, syncopation, the influence of Latin rhythms, expanding the palette with all other kinds of ways of creating beats or enhancing existing ones.
Yeah, awesome. So you also play piano, right?
Yeah. In fact, I played piano before I was a drummer. It's just that in the midst of me taking my piano lessons is when the Beatles played on television. It was like, all right, see you, piano, drums. And then some years later, I rediscovered the piano. And then actually, when I went to music college, I was torn between the two. And for one of the years that I was down in Miami, they allowed me to study with the resident jazz piano teacher.
Really?
And yeah, I really was being pulled away from drums into that. And, you know, it leads to another important discussion, which is I think a lot of drummers know nothing about harmony or melody. They only know rhythm. That's what we do on the set. And I feel really strongly if a drummer sat at a piano or picked up a guitar, you know, and tried to find their way around and learn chord structures, that what would follow is it could very well make a drummer become a much more musical player. And you know, over the years when I've played concerts, I'll, you know, meet people after the show and someone will say, God, you know, you play really musically, or you play really dynamically. And to me, it is clearly because I play other instruments, without question. You know, and when you think of some of the drummers who I think, quite frankly, are very musical, it's because they play piano. You know, Phil Collins, Jack DeJohnette, and I'm sure there are plenty others. So I would advise anyone who plays the drums, you know, to take a lesson or two, especially on piano or guitar, because they are instruments that cover the gamut of harmony, melody, in addition to rhythm.
Awesome. So back to recording, how do you feel that it's changed since when you got your start up until now, working with the new bands?
In that very first recording experience when we met Ringo,
Mm-hmm.
I remember the band set up together and we all played together, and once we got through all of the songs, then the producer, you know, had everybody else fix little parts that, say, needed improving. You know, so they would listen to the guitar playing all the way through and go, hey, yeah, okay, how about here? Let's punch in and see if you can just play that a little better. Same thing with the violin and with the keyboards. That's how I remember recording being in the 70s and maybe into the early 80s. By the time we got to the late 80s and into the present, you never know going into a recording session which way it's going to be. I've had sessions where I'll go in and everything has been recorded except the drums. So you put on headphones, you listen to a click, and you play along to the completed track other than the drums. Other times the drums have been put on in the middle. Maybe the bass and guitar has been cut. Other times nothing has been recorded, nobody is there, and I'm just listening to what you call a scratch guitar. Mm-hmm. That's where, you know, the guitarist, this is not what's going to be on the record, but the guitarist just played the form of the song, and then I'll play along with that. So you never know these days how you're going to do it. I still find the most fun way to record when everybody's there. You have the eye contact, you're listening to each other, you're you know, responding to each other's licks,
right?
You know, and it helps give a much nicer vibe.
It helps with the ebb and flow of how the music's progressing.
Totally, because that's what music's supposed to be. It's supposed to be interaction between musicians.
Communication.
Right.
Yeah. So back to playing with the click, how important is it to get comfortable with that?
Wow. For any drummers or musicians who are, here today, just understand that, I will say, not only the vast majority of recording, but, in most rock and pop recording settings these days, there will be a click that you have to play along with. And the click is there, to just kind of keep the time consistent from start to finish, because human beings have a tendency to speed up or to drag. And it's okay when you're playing live in concert, but again, this is for posterity, and you want things to be as close to perfection as possible. So it's very important for musicians, and in our case drummers, to be at home playing with a click. Don't walk into a studio, put on your headphones, and hear this thing and say to the producer or engineer, "Hey, there's this thing going, click, 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 click. Can you turn it off? I don't know what that is." You really should make practicing with a timekeeping device a regular part of your practice routine. It will also steadily improve your time, your inner clock, and believe me, contrary to popular belief, it will not make you play like a robot. No matter how much you practice with a metronome or a click track, you're still a human being, and you will always be a human being, and you will still not be perfect.
Right, yeah. You might sound a little bit like a robot at first, but you get comfortable with it after a while.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
When you were getting your chops together, were you playing along to your favorite albums a lot?
Somewhat. It's interesting, for the records that were done, in the 60s and 70s, click tracks were not used that widely. And so if you're jamming along with them, you're playing along to the imperfection of that band. So it's not necessarily a great thing. When you play along to most things that have been recorded from the later 80s to the present, odds are they were playing along to a click track, so the time should be a lot steadier. But I personally think that one should also be practicing with either just a click track or with music that has clicks, so that you're being put into this situation where you have to focus in on the pulse. And in the rock drums course, I had one of the guitarists, Johnny Roth from Winger, create a ton of play-along tracks, which are really quite amazing, with clicks on them. So even while you're creating drum parts, coming up with interesting, unique parts of your own, you're also getting the experience, which is just so important for someone who's really looking towards a professional career of being in a studio and playing in a band and just going the whole 9 yards. Yeah.
All right, so let's take some questions from the audience here. Christopher asks, how many hours did you practice every day when you were learning?
Hey, Christopher. I probably shouldn't be totally honest here. I was never someone who loved to practice, but I definitely found and still find that when I get on the drums on a regular basis, really every day being optimum, that it's the way you will see that steadily increasing technique in all areas of drumming. So I'd say, when I was younger, I was trying to practice at least, 2 hours a day. There were certain periods where I'd put in more. And then, when I started playing with my bands and we weren't on the road, we would have, days where we'd have extremely long practice sessions that would go several hours. I think you could also overdo practicing if you put too much time in where you're not playing with other musicians. That can get you into trouble, because you need the interaction of jamming with others in addition to the practicing that you do alone. But I would say try to get on your drum set every day. Try to have sticks in your hand every day, because they will just become an extension of who you are as a human being.
Nice. All right, so Flim Flam asks, any exercises you recommend to balance out the hands and feet as single bass drum player? I tend to be bottom heavy. What can I practice to balance out the volume between the limbs?
Wow, that's a really good question. How's it going, Flim Flam? If you have the opportunity to record yourself, you should do that so that you can listen for the inconsistencies in your playing. That's the best way to do it. So you might record yourself, listen to it and go, wow, I can't believe, like you're saying, you're hitting your kick drum way heavier than your hands are hitting. So then it's just a question of trying to lighten up a little bit with that bass drum foot to try to match what the hands are doing, or maybe kind of lean into things a little bit more with the hands. Hey, if we were sitting together, I could throw out a bunch more ideas for you. But try recording yourself and analyzing how you play to try to balance it out. It's interesting that you say that because I think the tendency with most drummers is that they're top heavy because their hands are much more developed than their feet are. So it's interesting that you're saying the opposite.
Yeah, and for all the assignments in your course, the students are recording themselves, right?
Yeah, every assignment involves playing along with a track where you have to create a drum part for it, and then a lot of the assignments also just have some unaccompanied instructions as well.
Yeah, and the recordings for that is very easy. Okay, so Michael Sambello asks, who are your 3 favorite players and why?
Hey Michael, I don't know if I could just say 3, but I will try. Let's start with Ringo because he was the reason I became a drummer, but also, the Beatles are the only band, when you think of bands, that you think of individual names, John, Paul, George, and Ringo. You wouldn't really think, Robert, Jimmy, John, Paul, and whoever. John, that's Led Zeppelin. An equally amazing band. But Ringo is a personality, and so that's why he's one of my favorite drummers. There are so many signature grooves that he created to where all you have to do is hear the beat, and we're not talking about anything that's technically difficult, just however that combination of notes came out, where you don't even have to hear the chords or the melodies to the song. You hear the beat and you would instantly know that's the Beatles, this is the song, that's Ringo. So that's one. I would then say Clive Bunker from Jethro Tull. He was a big band drummer that found his way into this incredible progressive rock band, and they were my biggest influence for a long while. This is back in the day when every note wasn't scrutinized. Drummers were able to play really busy and really sloppy. He was a true personality. Another drummer like in that category, Mitch Mitchell. He might even be my favorite. A jazz drummer just thrown into this acid rock realm, playing with Jimi Hendrix and kind of working off of those soaring guitar lines, a certain swing to his rock playing. I have to go beyond 3, okay? There's 2 more, okay? John Bonham, Led Zeppelin. There's just something really special about the way he plays or played, and he also has a lot of very interesting signature drum grooves that they've just stood the test of time. A super hard hitter, but also had a little bounce and swing in his playing. And the last drummer I want to mention is Billy Cobham, who changed my life when I heard him in the Mahavishnu Orchestra. Just, coming from more of a jazz background, but he was a super hard hitter, and I had never heard anything quite like that. He also brought military rudimental drumming into that whole mix, and it was spectacular. And let me just stick in Tony Williams at the end of it. Just a jazz drummer who he just did his own thing. You know, he didn't care that he was recording on a record. He was going to take chances. If you hear the clicking of the sticks, so be it. And he just had a ride cymbal sound and feel like no one to me. So that was 2 sets of 3. How's that?
It wasn't Tony like 17 when he started playing with Miles?
He was 7. He might have been 17. He might have even been 16.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
That guy was a monster. Okay, now we got a bass question. All right, so Sean asks, what do you look for in a bass player? Kip is obviously a great player, but what should a bass player do to really lock in with a drummer? Like, what do you look for?
Yeah. Hey, Sean. Well, you know, you find out immediately if you have chemistry with a bass player as soon as you start playing. Now, it's interesting. You know, I've played with so many great bassists in my career, and I've gotten to jam with some monster bass players who I've really admired, but when I jammed with them, I couldn't find their place on the beat. Just imagine, like, if this is a beat in here, you know, beat 1, some people hit on the front end of it, so like they're pushing the time. Others are really laid back where it's coming a little late, and others are right on the money. And there's no wrong or right. It's just that the way you play creates the feel, whether it's an edgy feel, a laid back, you know, loose, groovy feel, or just a right on the money feel. I don't really, it's hard for me to even kind of answer that question because within reason, I can find most bass players. It's like I'll play with them and go, oh, okay, this guy pushes things a little bit, so that's okay. I can make the adjustment. And so, you know, Kip Winger he's a really, really great bass player. He doesn't do fancy stuff, but then again, he's kind of singing on top of it, and so he's more like in the middle guy. Other bass players that I've played with who just are mind-blowing to me, Alphonso Johnson in Jazz is Dead. I used to see him in Weather Report and the Billy Cobb and George Duke Band back when I was in college, and he's a bass player that I looked at on stage and said, God, I hope I can play with him one day. And so I've been really lucky enough to have that opportunity. The bass players with the Dixie Dregs, the original bass player, Andy West, he plays with a pick, and he plays a little bit more on top of the beat, and love playing with him. Dave LaRue is maybe more in the center, plays with the thumb. I'm sure I'm leaving people out. John Mayung from Dream Theater, he's kind of got his own thing. You know, he's a one-of-a-kind bassist. But it's really not so much like, you know, being able to answer, like, what am I looking for? It's just you sit down and jam and it's either happening or not. But I do like a bass player who really has a very, very strong sense of rhythm, and almost like a bass player who can carry me along with them, you know, as much as me carrying them.
Yeah, it makes you a better player if you're tight with them.
It's always great if you can play with musicians, you know, that you think are better than you, because, you know, you will rise to the occasion.
Yeah. Okay, so last question. Carson asked, did you study any concert percussion instruments, xylophone, marimba, timpani, anything like that? And if so, how applicable is that to modern music and drumming today?
Yeah, it was Carson?
Carson, yes.
Hey, Carson. Yeah, when I was in college, I studied with a man whose name is Ronnie Gould, and he was a percussionist with the New York City Ballet Company at Lincoln Center. And he got me into all of the, you know, the mallet instruments and timpani, so xylophone, marimba, timpani, snare drum. And I clearly think that when you're in a situation learning all of those instruments and you happen to be a drum set player, they will make their way into your drum set playing. I think they help give you a sense of organization. The melodic instruments in that percussion family, like those keyboard mallets instruments, marimba and xylophone, and the timpani, will, you know, help you think musically. And you know, one of the things that I've done over the years since I'm a keyboard player is when I know I'm getting to do a drum solo in a concert, I will sometimes create a you know, a track that involves keyboard sounds and percussion sounds that is created as a vehicle for a drum solo to try to just step it up from just an unaccompanied drum solo. I'll start unaccompanied and then bring in that whole musical track that I'm playing on top of. And the fact that I studied classical percussion figures in heavily with creating the different drum parts that go with these musical pieces. I'll work out sometimes, you know, different like drum ostinato songs where I might start with some maraca mallets, you know, and play a pattern that repeats. And then on top of that, I'll use what are called rute or blastics, or you know, little dowels that make the drums sound a little bit different. And then on top of that, I'll work something out with the drums. So I think that, you know, thinking in that context has definitely come in part as a result of studying classical percussion.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Rod.